You don't get anything else anymore. Being Catholic used to be, it was a great cultural thing. You used to have a lot of respect. I mean, people always thought you were kind of weird and you did weird stuff like put ashes on your forehead. But the only reason to be Catholic now is if you love Jesus Christ with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And so we have to teach our kids to be willing to risk. They love being risky. And so we teach them that Christian life is a risky thing. To be a Christian is to face suffering. To be a Christian is to face the cross. And that's a beautiful risk to take. The fourth thing they said is that Christianity is shallow. It's a mile wide and an inch deep. We sort of, in years past, have put a focus on mass-producing disciples. Kids they're not dumb anymore in a sense. They don't just sit in the classroom and soak in information like they used to. We can't mass produce them. Christianity now has to become all about a relationship. And we're called now to make disciples in a brand new way. And that is through the one-on-one encounter with one another. So I encourage you to be willing to embrace, each encounter with a young person is so important. People are driven away, through nasty words that we might say at them. But I don't care who you are in the church, you see a young person, you reach out, you develop a relationship. And especially the fifth point that they say is that the church is anti-science, because they're pragmatists. I mean, that's the American philosophy, is pragmatism. And science makes sense. They've been told their whole lives that you can't have science and faith. And the poll was 52% of young people want to have a career in science, something science-oriented. But only 1% of youth ministers ever preached or ever had a lesson about science and faith. So they reached a point where they think they have to choose between being a scientist or being a Christian. And it's a false dichotomy, but they're at that point. So I encourage you, especially if you are a scientist, if you have some great skill, if you live that life, to reach out in some way. Maybe talk to John, the youth group guy, and say, hey, are there any kids in the youth group that really love science and really just want, to come see a lab or to hear how we can be both scientists and Christians and how our faith interacts with the whole thing. We have to be willing to reach out and make those relationships, make those bonds. And of course, the last thing they say is that the church is repressive. This is the big thing, especially for Catholic youth. 40% say that they disagree or they think the church teaching on sexuality is bad or is behind the times or whatever. I would be surprised if even 2 to 3% even know what the church's teaching on sexuality is. We were given a great gift by John Paul II in the theology of the body. And from my own experience of working in the college, at my seminary, the college I was attached to at Mount St. Mary's, and knowing my friends who have fallen away and my friends who are still Catholic as they graduate college, I dare say almost to a T, 100% of them, the teaching on the theology of the body had a major effect on their choosing to still live out their Catholic faith. So I encourage you, as parents or grandparents or teachers, to know what that teaching is and to help teach your kids. Again, they're getting sex from every angle. Why can't they get it from the good news as well? And there's, in the back of the church in that narthex, that thing, I was looking, they have all these books on the theology of the body for beginners and whatnot. My favorite one is, this one's not even back there, but it's Theology of His Body, Theology of Her Body, 2 books in one, written for high schoolers. But to be honest, if there was one thing that I, as a 26-year-old now, having gone through all these years of school and everything like that, if there was one thing that I would sort of am most upset of having been given through my years growing up, through the culture and everything like that, it would be the contraceptive mentality. Just this mentality that we have to make everything pleasing for ourselves, that we have to alter things so that I'm served by it. And it's a mentality that is sort of permeates through one's whole life in many ways. It forms that individual truth, that I'm the most important thing. And so, I would plead with you, if you're a parent of an 8th grader in the confirmation religious ed class, they're going to do theology of the body after confirmation, when most of them will stop going to classes. So I encourage you, make your kids go to class. But in many ways, Paul VI was right when he talked about contraception. He said, this is a bad thing. It's going to lead to the objectification of women, the breakdown of the families. Eventually, government will be coercive in reproductive issues, like today. In many ways, it was one of the biggest things for me to cast aside, to learn how to love in a brand new way, to love more fully, more self-sacrificially, to get rid of that mindset that these things have to be for ourselves and to turn in on ourselves, because every sin is a caving in on oneself. So those are the voices where they are. Those 6 voices, those 6 things. So, last but not least, sort of what we're called to. We're called to develop relationships, to make disciples in a whole new way by reaching out into their relationships. We're called to help them in a special way with their vocations, whether that's to be a scientist or to be a teacher. They need to know how their faith actually affects their life. It can't just be a Sunday thing. They're very good at bringing things to the logical conclusion. So if we say, churches or faith is just something you do on Sunday, they'll logically follow that all the way to mean well, then why do I do it any other day of the week? Or if we say church is optional on Sunday, they'll logically follow that to mean why even bother with it in the first place? So they take things to their logical conclusions. So we have to be able to help them realize where their faith connects with their vocation, where the two work together. And lastly, to help them, rediscover an ability to think in a way. And that was probably the hardest one to do, because, like I said, many times they were told that essentially they're called to make themselves number one. They're the I generation. It's all about me. I'm the truth. I'm the be-all, end-all truth. Now, a closing point. In a special way, I'm talking to the fathers. A poll was done. This was about 20 years ago now, but I think the stats sort of bear themselves out. A poll was done about the father's impact, or what had the greatest impact on their children's faith. And so they asked fathers and mothers who, attend regularly church, who attend irregularly, and who don't attend at all. If a father does not practice the faith, a child has a 1 in 50 chance of practicing the faith when he grows up, regardless of whether the mother practices it every day or never. If a father does practice the faith regularly, less than a quarter children leave. Over a third will practice it regularly, and another third will practice it irregularly. And the ironic thing is, that number goes up as mothers become more and more irregular in their practice. So I'm not saying that mothers stop practicing your faith. That's not your excuse to stop practicing. But in many ways, children will look to their father. And the greatest example, the greatest witness you can give as a father, as a grandfather, is to be caught praying. To be caught on your knees praying to God. Because the father is, my dad can beat up your dad. My dad is the strongest person ever. My dad is my hero. And if they see their father on his knees, then they know God must exist. And that God must be the all-powerful, all-loving one. So I encourage fathers. And then I encourage all of you, these are going to be words I'll close with from, at the end of this book. Like I said, this book is called You Lost Me. It's a great read. If you want more ideas, there's tons of them in here. of things that we might be able to do for our young people. But this is from a young person speaking to those who want to support their generation. And she says, I want you to be someone I want to grow up to be like. I want you to step up and live by the Bible's standards. I want you to be inexplicably generous, unbelievably faithful, and radically committed. I want you to be a noticeably better person than my humanist teacher, than my atheist doctor, than my Hindu next-door neighbor. I want you to sell all you have and give it to the poor. I want you to not worry about your health like you're afraid of dying. I want you to live like you actually believe in the God you preach about. I don't want you to be like me. I want you to be like Jesus. And that's when I'll start listening.